with voting rights advocate Valerie Motoshege. She holds a master's degree from Tufts University and has taken a sabbatical leave this year to work exclusively on voting rights. So at the conclusion of the film, Valerie will present really important information and actions that we can take to increase voter access and voter turnout. She's also prepared a vital resource guide just for us, 100 actions that we can take to mitigate voter suppression. If you look for the box that says Q&A on your screen, you can click that box, and either during the film or during Valerie's talk, you can post questions for our question and answer period. My name is Christy Van Slyke, and I'm a member of the Diversity Film Series Committee, a 20-plus-year-old nonprofit serving the Bay Area community. We do this by screening 6 or 7 documentary films each year, always for free, and always exploring diversity themes. Our aim is to spark community conversation, usually with a speaker or a panel. We invite you to visit our website. It's diversityfilmseries.org. You can sign up there for flyers announcing the next documentary and speaker, to share a recording of today's event and our resource guide that Valerie's prepared, and even to donate. Our upcoming documentary is called Waging Change, and it is a truly revelatory film about tip workers. We thank you for joining us, and now we present the film, Suppress 2020, A Fight to Vote.
How will I be able to vote without putting my life in danger?
The Black Lives Matter actions make voting more important than ever.
Will this health crisis become a constitutional crisis?
Am I going to be able to vote in November?
We have a historic decision today, striking down a key part of the Voting Rights Act, a civil rights law passed back in 1965.
The Supreme Court essentially said racism is over, and these communities don't need to pre-clear these changes anymore.
This decision leaves virtually unprotected minority voters in communities all over this country.
It let the dogs out. It let these racially discriminatory voting laws to just run wild. Within hours of the Voting Rights Act being gutted, Texas had a new strict photo ID law. And within days, Alabama announced its own repressive voter ID law.
We are witnessing a tidal wave of voter suppression around the country.
200,000 more people would have voted in Wisconsin if not for their strict voter ID law.
Voter purges have become rampant. Since the 2016 election, states have removed almost 17 million voters nationwide.
You describe Georgia as the epicenter of the current voter suppression battle. What has earned Georgia that distinction?
Georgia's tight race for governor is getting national attention.
Brian Kemp is not only the Republican gubernatorial nominee, he's Georgia's Secretary of State.
Stacey Abrams looking to make history by becoming the nation's first female African-American governor.
Volunteers are picking up phones and knocking on doors across the state.
Come in and register to vote.
We are very excited to register as many people as we possibly can.
What do we want?
Register to vote.
When do we want it?
Today.
I come as one, but I stand as 10,000.
Pull back that veneer. And you see something really rotten happening. It's almost like termites coming in, they're in the wood, they're eating the wood away, and you don't even realize your house is getting ready to collapse until it's almost too late. We've got to understand, this isn't a Klan cross burning. This stuff is very bureaucratic, it's very mundane, it's very routine, but it is lethal.
Oh, beautiful, for spacious skies, for amber.
My name is Bobby Jenkins. I live in Cuthbert, Georgia. The county is Randolph County. I spent about almost 35 years in education. I'm a superintendent of schools.
My name is Loretta Brown. I live in Morgan, Georgia, and I grew up in Randolph County. I am the state advisor for the Georgia NAACP Youth and College Division.
My name is Lewis Brooks. I live in Thompson, Georgia, Upson County, and I've been living here my whole 89 years, except the 2 years I spent in service in Korea. In I believe it was 55 or 56, that's when they started to letting black people vote in Upson County. When I went to register to vote, it was tough. They asked me all kind of questions to try to keep me from registering. I passed the test. Once I got my voting right, I decided I wasn't going to let anything stop me from voting. Because I used to walk. You go up the street here, across the next street over there, I walk over there and walk back and vote. And I didn't miss a voting, except when they closed the poll. I'm a citizen. It's my right to vote and speak my opinion.
I saw this ad saying that there was a proposal to close 7 of the 9 precincts in Randolph County. I said, what?
And then they put it in the papers that they was closing polls, costing them too much money.
First of all, Randolph is a poor county. Just to give you an example of what it would mean, there's a community benevolence a little north of town. Had that precinct been closed, some of those individuals would have to go 30 miles round trip in order to vote. It would have been a terrible hardship on our poor, on our elderly, and on those who are least able to afford transportation.
I got disabled and I couldn't do no driving. I know I couldn't afford to go that far to vote. This was in a black neighborhood. It made me feel like they would close it down to keep the black people from voting, because most black people vote Democrat. They only closed one white voting place. Everybody from out here in the black had to go clean over there to the white section to vote. We're human, and we have our rights to vote just like anybody else.
Voters in Randolph County, Georgia are outraged.
Randolph County residents expressed their concerns with the Board of Elections.
Our citizens turned out in full force.
Big problem there.
They were behind us 100%, trying to keep those polling places open.
Convenience of the voter. You all are not considering that at all.
There's no disenfranchisement for the African Americans.
I went to the meeting, find out that they were trying to close 7 of the precincts.
You've got to stand up. You cannot allow this to continue.
They gave a couple of reasons, saying it would save money. Was that several of the polling places were not ADA compliant. The thing that was so ironic is we voted that way in May. You know, they weren't any worse in November than they were in May.
It will be impossible for rural voters without vehicles to vote on election day. It will be impossible for them. They will have to walk 3.5 hours just to get from one of these polling places to Cuthbert and Shellman.
We did petition to keep it open. Pressure from the residents, civil rights organization, speaking up, speaking out.
And they the meeting to order, and they only had one motion. They voted to keep them open.
The news of what was happening here in Randolph County went worldwide.
The incident that we experienced threw the spotlight on everything else that had been going on. You know, we find out that in the state of Georgia, there were over 200 other polling places had been closed.
If you move a poll 4 miles, it is the equivalent of a 20% drop in black voter turnout. That's what shutting down these polls mean.
With 2 months to go, the race is heating up in Georgia.
Stacey Abrams' campaign feel they have the momentum behind them, and many of the polls we've seen so far support that.
You know, the Democrats are working hard, registering all these minority voters, because if they can do that, they can win these elections in November.
There's no law in Georgia that requires the Secretary of State to process voter registration forms on a particular timeline.
Kemp withheld putting the names of thousands on the voter registration list until after the election.
80% were African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans.
Keep your eyes on the prize.
This is Fulton County.
Money for the Golden Bay.
Linda Marshall is my name. Most of my professional career has been in public service of one kind or another, as a teacher, as a government worker. I moved here in August of this year, but because of my emphasis on always being registered and always having the ability to vote, I did that almost immediately when I got here. Of course, I also knew the importance of the upcoming election, and I wanted to be a part of that history. It got closer and closer and closer to the election, and I was getting a little bit concerned, so I called the Secretary of State's office. My name is not on the roll. They can't tell me where it is. So all of that paperwork that I sent in, I don't know where it is. I'm 65, and for the first time, I did not get a chance to vote in a very close election of historic importance and proportion. Welcome to Georgia.
The midterm election in Georgia is only 29 days away.
Civil rights leaders say Kemp is illegally removing people from Georgia's voters list.
Republican Brian Kemp has already gotten the backing of our current president. Thousands have purged from Georgia's voting rolls.
Purged from Georgia's voting rolls. 890,000 no idea they could vote.
Other states use the same tactic over who's been removed from the voter roll.
There has been instance after instance of unlawful voter purging. States are removing voters, many of whom have actually been found to have been eligible but were unlawfully removed from the rolls.
I received the purge notice. So I open it up and I read the first sentence. I, along with 380,000 Georgians, received the same notice.
That's an especially pernicious way to prevent people from voting, because once you register to vote, you would think that you should be able to remain on the rolls. And once you're removed from the rolls, you cannot vote.
I went out
and got the mail, and there were 2 letters in there. They looked official. You're hereby notified that the City of Thunderbolt has challenged your right to vote. The City of Thunderbolt states that you no longer reside within the municipality. My license is valid. My address is valid. I own this home. Why are you questioning my right to vote?
You know, the purges, they've been going on for decades, maybe over a century in this state.
If you haven't voted in the last few elections, they'll purge you as if you must not be in the state anymore. If you move within the same county, they'll purge you, assuming you're not living in Georgia anymore. If you don't return a postcard from the Secretary of State, they'll purge you, because to them it means you're not a resident at this address. All of these tactics specifically and disproportionately target people of color, poor people, the elderly, all of whom tend to vote for Democrats.
Brian Kemp is notorious for erasing the polls and purging people right before the election deadline.
You have a candidate at the top of the ticket who is responsible for maintaining the integrity of the election.
He needed to have his hands on the levers.
You have an umpire who is also playing in the game.
Less than 20 days away from the midterms now.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
Literally is a dead heat.
This governor's race is already one for the history books, but it's also seeing record numbers of requests for absentee ballots, especially from African-American voters.
At a time where we're seeing roughly almost half of the people who've turned in an absentee ballot are people of color, that's a really, really good sign for Stacey Abrams.
We caught them off guard by running such a large-scale program and mailed 1.6 million African Americans an absentee ballot application.
In this midterm election, the absentee ballot requests are even outperforming presidential years. So that is startling and eye-popping, and something that we need to dig in on to see what's going on there.
Broderick. I'm in Powder Springs, Georgia, Cobb County. I did 24 years in the military, deployed to Iraq twice, Bosnia, Saudi Arabia. I voted absentee before when I was deployed. When I was in Iraq the first time, I voted absentee, and when I was in Iraq the second time, I voted absentee. The absentee ballot is a very important tool that exists, is to allow people, not only just the military, but anybody who happens to be away from their voting station, to be able to cast their vote.
My name is Peggy Shu. I'm from Johns Creek, Georgia. I left Georgia for DC in the beginning of October, and before I left, I mailed out my absentee ballot application so that our registrar would send an absentee ballot to my new DC address.
I work at U.S. Army Central, which is located at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. I'm away from home during the week. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back to Georgia to vote. I could only do this absentee. I filled out everything I was supposed to fill out. I sent their documents in. I got confirmation that it was received. And to my surprise, I did not receive my absentee ballot.
I checked my mailbox every day. It was like nearing the end of the month. And so I started calling the voter protection hotline. I called my registrar. I sent emails, and it was really getting close to the election date. And I never received my ballot. The election day came and went, and I wasn't able to vote in the end.
When I contacted my wife and asked her about it, I think it was a couple of days before the election, it came here. And I tried contacting the Georgia Elections Board. I was told they did receive my absentee ballot request. Everything was filled out correctly, but that they mailed it to the wrong address. And she admitted that, yes, they did mess up. It was their fault. But there was nothing I could do about it. It's too late. it's over with, and my vote will not be counted during this election.
It was probably one of the most frustrating things I've ever experienced. After having spent, my entire college career very invested in the political process, it was, I don't know, like a punch to the gut.
It still pisses me off to this day. Being in Baghdad, voting absentee was easier than being 4 hours away trying to vote absentee in South Carolina.
I took to Facebook and, like the millennial activist that I am, I recounted my experience in a Facebook post. I wrote, this is what happened. I wasn't able to vote, and if you had a similar experience, let me know. And my friend from high school, she reached out to me and she said, I also had struggles trying to get my ballot in, voting absentee.
So I submitted an absentee ballot. It came 2 days right before Election Day.
Over the course of 48 hours, we had 40 people. So many people in our immediate Facebook circle knew somebody who had a similar experience to us.
People have requested it like far in advance. Some people just didn't get their vote in.
That was when we really realized that this was not an isolated incident. It was a much bigger issue and a much more deeper rooted sort of phenomenon that was going on statewide.
I did speak with the Board of Elections and he just dismissed it as like a hiccup. And he's like, oh, like, no, you don't really know what you're talking about. 40 cases, not really a hiccup. It's more of like a wake-up call.
Today, we've worked to get answers about the claim that thousands of voters never got the absentee ballots they requested.
Tuesday morning, Election Day.
The race between Abrams and Kemp is literally neck and neck.
Their fate is now in the hands of voters.
The day is finally upon us.
The midterm elections are happening.
Voters head to the polls in one of the most intensely fought midterm elections.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
I live in the South. I'm always worried about Election Day.
Have a great morning and go vote.
Oh, yeah. Gotta go vote today.
Voting started here in Georgia this morning, and if you think hitting the polls early will keep you from getting stuck on long lines, think again.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
I've never seen line 1. The line hasn't moved in over an hour.
I really thought I was going to be able to run in and run out like I usually do. The first thing I saw was just people everywhere. So we stood there for a while without moving. And then we would inch up. And then we wouldn't move. We had a lot of people with children there, pregnant mothers, elderly people. Some people have medical issues.
I took my son to school that morning, and then I went to vote at Ferguson Elementary, where I vote every election. The line just keeps getting longer. The line was so long through the school and wrapped around the building. The lines was crazy everywhere, all over the county. It was real long. I was in line for 2 hours. I got to the door. That's when they was checking your ID before you go in, and she couldn't find my name. She directed me to go downtown Gwinnett, and I was like, I'm not gonna vote. And it was this older lady. She came over and she like held my hand and was like, please go do it. We need this. And I looked in her eyes and said, I will.
I registered somewhere else and they pulled it up in the system.
About 8 or 9, we started getting the calls about the long lines.
Long lines at the polling stations lead to low voter turnout. The research is just crystal clear on that.
Everyone in the world knew we were going to vote today. And in my neighborhood, there are no power cords. All these dedicated people waiting to vote. This is what we call voter suppression.
People were like upset and angry. I started calling the Secretary of State's office. I was either hung up on, placed on hold. They want people to go home and not vote. I ain't going nowhere. I'm gonna be right here.
The reason they sent me from Ferguson to the downtown Gwinnett was for the provisional vote. So I drove 25 minutes, and then when I got there, it was crowded in there. I waited 45 minutes to find out that's not where I needed to be. She told me that this was the wrong place and that I can go back to Ferguson. I had to call back and redo my schedule. So now the voting not only cut on my time, cut on my money.
When we went in, filled out all the paperwork, had the ID, took it up to the lady. I had mine in my hand. One hand had hers in the other, because she's legally blind. So we go give it to the lady, and she goes to scan Barbara's ID. Wow. And so she looked up at Barbara. She said, well, Miss Barbara, when was the last time you voted? My sister got strong. I've been voting since I was 18 years old. And I'm 82.
Yeah, I was disappointed.
She was a little upset. My girl wanted to vote, and they were trying to keep her from voting.
Since I became a citizen, I have not missed an election. I showed up, and a very nice lady, she looked at my ID and said, no, you're not registered. And I said, no, wait a second. Here's my registration card, and showed them that I was registered. And they said, yeah, but your name is Del Rio with a space, but your voter ID says Del Rio one word, and therefore it doesn't match. In the voter registration, my name shows as Del Rio with a space. My ID is Del Rio, no space. That was a non-match. I said, this is not legal and I need to be allowed to vote. After much discussion, they said to me, this time we'll allow you to vote, but it's a little bit like they're doing me a favor. The right to vote should be something that we should make easier rather than more difficult.
Latinos and Asian Americans are 6 times more likely than white Georgians to be cut from the voter rolls because of exact match, and Black Americans are 8 times more likely to be cut because of exact match.
I have voted in every election, and all of a sudden I'm not there.
Controversy surrounds the state's exact match law that put the registrations of 53,000 voters, most of them African Americans, on hold because of discrepancies in the way their names are spelled in state databases.
People of color have names that are a little bit less typical, and that's where the errors are at their highest. Brian Kemp knows this.
A group of students will not have their voices heard at the polls, at least not in Georgia.
They're turning a bunch of students away over here.
We're showing up here and at the Booker T. Washington location, and their names were not on the actual roll.
I'm waiting for them hours. Yeah, I'm really pissed off right now.
The poll workers have my ID is not anywhere. Please stay in line if you can.
The students was being turned away. I talked to over 50 students that morning.
First, they told me I was at the wrong polling station.
They said you didn't get registered. I was like, what do you mean?
And there was only about 4 voting ballot booths.
They didn't process my registration. My registration didn't go through. I walked back to my dorm and said, I guess I just won't vote.
Just before I went to vote, I had been in an African American history class where we were actually talking about voter suppression, about what was it like for people that were going to vote. I filled out a little slip of paper, gave it to the poll workers. They looked up at me and they said, it's coming up in our system as though you're not a citizen of the United States. I just sort of looked at them like they had 2 heads. I'm sorry, I was born in New York. What?
When I got to the front of the line, they informed me that I was registered to vote, but not in Dougherty County. They were telling me that I was registered back home in Winter Robins, where I was from, and I've never voted there. I've never even been registered there.
The thing was that I had brought proof that I was a U.S. citizen. I had with me my driver's license, my passport card, and my Emory student ID, but they would not look at the passport card whatsoever to prove that I was a citizen. I walked out crying. What I learned in history class just hours before, this happened to me in 2018.
I had been through and participated in voter registration drive on campus within a community. It was just like, wow, after all of this, I'm not going to be able to vote myself.
When I was growing up, voting was a thing. It was an event. And so little me is trailing behind my parents watching them vote.
My parents would take me to the voting polls every time when I was little. I would go in and I would help them fill out the bubbles.
I get a chance to vote, and then you get there and the experience is just terrible, and you have to call your mom and be like, why is this so hard? You never told me it would be this hard.
This was huge for us because Stacey Abrams was actually a Spelman alum. History would have been made, and it would have been made by my Spelman sister.
If there is no one who gets to 50% tonight, Robin, there will be a runoff in December.
We'll find out as the day and evening goes on.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Are they letting you know? Are you really kidding me?
Old people who can't vote, there's young people who can't vote, there's people in every county who can't vote.
It just created this intense fog of confusion across the state.
Been here for 3 hours, 4 or 5 hour wait, 5 hours.
This is way, way too long for us to stay and vote.
How long have you waited in line here?
About 3.5 hours.
Have you decided you can't stand it? You can't take it anymore? Or you going to go home?
I'm hurting. I'll be back. I got to go take some medicine.
It was really good. The lines weren't too long and everyone was super helpful.
We don't hardly ever have to wait here. It's always a pleasant experience up here.
If you have a fixed resource, an easy way to suppress the vote is to just make that resource unavailable to the people who you don't want to vote. And that's exactly what happened in the 2018 election here in the state of Georgia. In places like North Fulton County, which are wealthy, there were more machines than anyone could ever use. In black neighborhoods, there were a quarter of the number of machines that were needed to service the population.
Lots of people left without voting.
It was people just dropping off when it became 2 hours, 3 hours. 4th hour is very heartbreaking.
All it takes is a little walking away at 159 counties to influence an election. A little here, a little there, and then in a race like this, which was so close, there you go.
All night on Twitter, a trending topic, hashtag stay in line.
I had to go and pick my son up. He had to be picked up before 6. I picked my son up and he went with me and sat in the car. And then I went back to Ferguson Elementary. And by this time, the evening crowd is there and the line has tripled. And I was like, ooh, there is no way. Just for my one vote, it took me like 6 hours. And I wanted to give up because I promised that elderly lady outside that I would do it.
5 hours, so about 5 hours took me to vote. It sucks the life out of you.
I'd been in people's homes, I'd been in their neighborhoods, I'd held their hands. And so to get to election night and to start hearing more and more stories of voter suppression, to hear more and more from people who were told that they couldn't vote or who were turned away or had to give up because of 4-hour lines, that broke my heart.
Republican Brian Kemp holds a narrow lead over Democrat Stacey Abrams.
Tens of thousands of ballots left to be counted in this election. They were counting provisional ballots for hours.
Provisional ballots are basically placebos. They're being given to voters to kind of shut them up, make them go away.
The next day, I was so excited because they were saying that it was a close race. I was like, oh, let me make sure that my vote count. So I called there, the number that was on the paper that I got from the voting poll. And she go, oh no, they counting every vote. You don't need to call. I called my mom to double check. My mom worked for the poll for 20 some years. And she said, no, that's not true. You call back to make sure the vote count. And someone else says to the phone, and I got the same thing. No, you don't need to call back. We counting all the votes.
We just started discovering so many people voting provisionally. We realized, oh, you voted provisionally, so you might have to come back here the next day and show your ID. Is that something you know? And they're like, no, I already voted. Like, I'm good.
But you have to come back within 3 days with the documentation to prove you are who you say you are. When you have a large working class population that has to punch a clock, that's really tough. You've lost pay from work. trying to vote. That's a poll tax.
From Gwinnett County Elections.
I wanted to confirm if my vote was counted or not.
All right, what is your last name?
Kimball.
Let's see, there was no participation.
So does that...
You weren't given credit for voting.
My vote was not counted.
It looks like it on election day, yes, ma'am.
Oh, no, I thank you. Goodbye.
Last night, my opponent ended her campaign. The election is over, and I'm honored to be Georgia's governor-elect.
I acknowledge that former Secretary of State Brian Kemp will be certified as the victor in the 2018 gubernatorial election. But to watch an elected official baldly pin his hopes for election on the suppression of the people's democratic right to vote has been appalling. This is not a speech of concession, because concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. As a woman of conscience and faith, I cannot concede that.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Georgia 2018 was a case study of voter suppression. And as we approach the 2020 elections, we're seeing a coordinated effort to suppress, from lawyers, millions of dollars, and potentially the biggest tool of all, the coronavirus.
The coronavirus pandemic is creating concerns ahead of the 2020 election. With no official end in sight to the crisis, there are questions about whether voters will be able to head to the polls to cast their ballot in November.
Out of a large city of Milwaukee, we almost got 600,000 people in the city limits. They only have 5 polling sites open during a pandemic.
In Wisconsin today, thousands waiting for hours, forced to choose between protecting their own health and exercising their right to vote.
This is so wrong. This is just so wrong. Stop playing politics with our lives.
The 2020 primary in Georgia was like the 2018 election all over again.
This is primary day in Georgia. Lines in Atlanta stretching for blocks.
There were people and seniors who had been sitting out waiting to vote for more than 5 hours.
This is wrong. This is America.
I think that mail-in voting is a terrible thing.
If you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
Oh, beautiful for Spain.
We are not going to let them take from us what our grandparents and parents fought and suffered and died to give us in the first place.
We are here to resist an ID law that is undemocratic, unconstitutional, and immoral.
People are demanding democracy. New Mexico now has same-day voter registration. Iowa, Colorado, Nevada, Florida, and Arizona all passed laws restoring voting rights to those formerly incarcerated. Maine has enacted automatic voter registration. Delaware and Virginia enacted early in-person voting. And in response to the coronavirus pandemic, Michigan, Illinois, New Hampshire, and California have all committed to expanding mail-in and absentee voting in the 2020 election.
We belong together. We are all part of the fabric of this country, and we understand what's at stake.
Any voter suppression law is not just about black people. It is about America itself.
On my mother's dying bed at 92 years old, former sharecropper, her last words were, "Do not let them take our votes away from us."
No one should have to risk their life to vote. And for the politicians that put you in front of a coronavirus firing squad, vote them out.
From sea to shining sea.
Welcome back. We just need a moment to transition to our speaker. Oh, I see that she's here. So I just want to reintroduce her. First, I have to say that I'm always astonished and even enraged each time I see this film. So we're especially grateful to have an expert on voting rights to clarify and guide us with some actions to take. As I mentioned earlier, Valerie Morashege has taken a sabbatical this year to work really exclusively on voting rights. So she has quite a lot of information to give us. Remember that you can submit questions by clicking on the Q&A box on your screen and post your questions there. And so now we're very honored to have you, Valerie Morashege, with us. Thank you for speaking.
Hello, everyone. I'm Valerie Morashige, and I'm here in the Los Angeles area. But all the information I'm going to give you is customized for Alameda County. So don't worry about any of that because all voting is local, as we all know. And so I just want to say we have a perfect storm for voter suppression that's going to be happening in October and November. We have a pandemic, we have wildfires, we have election rules changing all the time, and we have polling centers that are closing because of the social distancing public mandates, and we have all kinds of shenanigans happening around where drop boxes are going to be. So right now, according to the website, Alameda County only has 28 out of their 66 drop boxes confirmed. So that's one concrete action you can do right now. You can go to their website, and I have links on my info sheet, and it'll tell you where to go to find the list of all of the drop boxes they have confirmed and the ones that are pending. So you can call those places that are pending and say, look, we really need a drop box here. We really want to vote safely during this pandemic, and drop boxes is one of the ways that we're going to get there. Another thing I want to say about, I think the biggest fight that we're going to have is around trust. Are people going to really trust these results, these election results? And one of the best ways to squash all this misinformation and disinformation is talking to your people and knowing the facts. So that's really important. If you're the trusted messenger, then they will believe you over anything that they read on Facebook or see on social media or hear on the news. So just make sure that you practice really good information hygiene, and you vet all the information that you pass along, and that you arm yourself with the right information. So I'm here to answer all your questions about what you can do to fight voter suppression now, and I'm just here to be your voting BFF. So please bring me all your questions.
Valerie, we're lucky to have you as our good voting friend. Voting Valerie, I know your friends call you. So our first question is there anything specifically that we can do here in Alameda County to ensure our rights to vote?
Sure. So the first thing you have to do is check your own registration, right? Like when you go on the airplane and they show you the video that you have to put on the air mask first for yourself before you start helping others. So the same thing, check your own registration, make sure you're an active voter and that they have the right address on file, because they're mailing us all absentee ballots. So that's the first thing you need to do. The second thing you need to do is make sure you sign up for Where's My Ballot. So in California, we have a way that you can track when your ballot is mailed out, when it's back into the Postal Service, if you're sending it that way, and when they received it and whether it's been counted. So you will get email, text, or call updates on all of those stages of voting so that you'll know exactly what's happening with your ballot. And make sure everyone you know is also signed up for Where's My Ballot. So this is really important because as we saw for the Georgia election, it wasn't just that they mailed in their ballot or they actually were at the polls and voted provisionally. What was really important that they were able to cure their ballot or remedy their ballot if there was something wrong with it. The other thing that you need to do is to sign up to be a poll worker or be an election protection volunteer. So what that means, if you're not in one of our vulnerable populations, because we know this COVID is affecting different populations differently. So if you are able to, please be a poll worker. You are going to be the ones on the ground that are maintaining the safety and security of our elections. And if you're not able to do that, then you can sign up to be an election protection volunteer. So there's different things you saw in the video about how they had people manning the hotlines. So that's one way you can do that safely from home. They give you training on all of the election rules. You'll be taking phone calls and answering voters' questions. And that also serves as really important data for the lawyers. So if they need to mount a legal defense, they have all that information. So the other thing that I really want to stress is that vote ASAP, vote as soon as possible. So that's going to look different for everyone, whether you're going to mail it back in, or whether you're going to walk it into a drop box, or whether you're going to actually take it to the polls and drop it off there. So just make sure you have a plan, make sure everyone you know has a plan, and that's pretty much what we can do here locally, right, in our own communities. But also, if you want to start branching out and thinking about bigger spheres of influence, you can always start phone banking into those states or text banking and contacting voters in states where voter suppression is a serious issue. So in Pennsylvania, you can call voters so that they're signed up for their absentee ballot. Like in California, we're lucky. We're getting all our absentee ballots are all being mailed to us. But if you're in certain states, they're not doing that. And they're actively trying to make it really difficult for you to get your ballot. So start calling those voters in those states. And I have all those resources if you're interested in doing something like that.
Okay, thank you. Excellent information, Valerie. We have a number of other questions. Can you let us know approximately how many polling stations have been closed since 2017, for example?
Oh, I wish I had those statistics off the top of my head, but actually I'm not really sure about that, but it's significant, and it depends by state, and it also depends by county. So you can see how difficult that would be to figure out what those numbers are. So, you know, during this pandemic also, because of the different public health mandates, they're just not able to open the same number of polling places. Just
Sure.
because of the social distancing requirements, they need so much square footage to be able to accommodate the voters. So that's also another thing that's making it really difficult to identify polling locations right now.
Would you say this place where your mail-in ballot is the drop box rather than using the postal service? And then how can you find out your closest drop box?
So for your county, they already have a list up for Alameda County of where the confirmed drop boxes are and where the pending drop boxes are. So you can already go to AC Votes to go check that out. And also on your sample ballot or on your absentee ballot, they will put the closest ones to your vicinity. And here's another way that you can get out the word about where those drop boxes are. If you come across one, post it on your social media and tag where the location is. So I've actually been doing this on my social media already on Instagram. Every time I see a drop box, I take a picture and then I tag where it is. And, you know, it's kind of like Pokemon Go for me. I'm like, yay, another drop box. And then, you know, just so that people know what they look like, kind of what kind of locations they are. So I've seen 2 so far, and I've come to the conclusion that Los Angeles City libraries are partnering with our elections officials to have drop boxes. So, you know, you can start getting a sense of where these drop boxes are going to be. But you already have a list, and you all have to start pressuring these locations to start hosting these drop boxes.
That is a great idea, to take the picture and to just publicize it, because it also reminds people to, as soon as possible, drop that ballot. So thank you for that idea. A few people are wondering if you have any idea what's happened in Georgia in terms of reliable opportunities to vote for this coming election?
It has not. It has not gotten better. It has gotten
Oh,
yeah. So you can imagine what Kemp did as the Secretary of State. Now he's actually the governor. So it's not good. So I know there's a ton of organizations that are working on this right now. Like we have boat riders who actually will help you every single step of the way to get a voter ID because they have all kinds of arcane rules around that. We also have Reclaim the Vote that is working on making sure that people haven't been purged from the rolls, and if they have been, how they can get back on the rolls. And you know, I've sat in on a couple of these public meetings that they have for the, you know, because the election officials have to have public comment period. So I've been on a couple of these Zoom meetings with where they have public comment with Georgia. It starts at 6 a.m. because of the time difference, but it has not gotten any better, unfortunately.
Well, as a follow-up to that, someone's wondering if you know the status of any of the lawsuits that were mentioned at the end of the film, or lawsuits in other states.
So for the lawsuits, let's see. So the best place to go for that, so I'm not a lawyer or any kind of legal expert in any kind of way, so I don't want to give you information that's incorrect, but if I'll send out a link that has a list of all of the lawsuits, and it has all of the outcomes for that in regards to voting.
Okay, that's great. Do you know, or can we find out when the ballots will start being counted? Let's say here in California and in other states, once they're received?
So this one's also tricky because it goes back to all of the rules being very specifically local. So in California, they're not really supposed to release any kind of information about the early votes. So even if they did start counting them, they can't tell us any results. But first of all, the ballots drop on October 5th. So that's when they're going to start being sent out. And we can start mailing them back as soon as they receive them. Our drop boxes are open starting October 6th at 9 a.m. I haven't heard specifically from Alameda County what their pickup schedule is, but to give you an example for LA County, I just got confirmed that they're picking up ballots from ballot drop boxes every 72 hours during the early voting period, and then E-10, like as we get closer to the elections, they're going to be collecting those ballots every 24 hours, so at the end of each day. So and then from there they start processing them, but they can't let us know what the count is. So obviously, because then we'll start rumors about, oh, there's no point voting because, you know, they're so far ahead, or, you know, people will start making all kinds of assumptions about whether their vote's going to count or not. So they won't be releasing any kind of information, even if they do start processing the ballots earlier. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Will we ever know how many people might have been purged here in California? Is that information distributed?
So I can't talk to the fact about how many voters have been purged, because that's how many people have been removed from the rolls incorrectly. But I can speak to how many of our absentee ballots were rejected during the March primary. So it was close to 100,000.
Wow.
Yeah. And most 70% of that was because the absentee ballots arrived too late. So it was past that 3-day deadline. But obviously that's a huge issue right now with all of this current postal service nonsense. So our governor said we are counting ballots until we're accepting ballots up until 17 days after the election. So that whole ballots being late and the 70,000 that got thrown out, hopefully that will take care of the issue. But you know, we don't want to rely on that all the time. Let's not start getting into this habit of, oh, it's okay, even if it's late, they'll count it, right? Like we don't want to go there. So get it in early. As long as it's postmarked by November 3rd, you're fine, okay? But better. Earlier is always better.
Yeah, yeah. Valerie, do we know if the drop boxes are protected in some way?
So this is where the pandemic made it really tough, because typically you used to have some staff drop boxes. So the people, the host organizations would keep an eye on the drop box. They would make sure that, you know, people had assistance with their ballot if they needed it, you know, like, oh, make sure you sign the back of the envelope, right? A lot of times they were inside libraries. So it was pretty much, you know, very user friendly. You just go in, make sure you're good, and you drop it off. But now it's these outdoor drop boxes because of the pandemic, and so they aren't going to be staffed in that kind of way. But these drop boxes are pretty secure. I don't want to get into all the details, but like you need like a tank, or you know, they're like 1,000 pounds. They're made out of steel. They've been checked by the fire department. They're pretty, they can only fit a tiny little ballot, you know, so you can't get anything else in there. And like I said, they'll be checking on them regularly, and they try to put them in really highly visible locations. And a lot of times there's coordination with the city and with the police and businesses around the area to make sure that they understand that there's going to be a ballot drop box there. So it's not the best answer, but
No,
you know,
that's
they're
good.
trying. They're trying.
Yeah. Somebody's asking if you know if this film that we saw has been seen or has been successful with audiences that are historically disenfranchised groups. Wondering about the distribution of this film and how it's been received by some of the people who have themselves been disenfranchised.
I think this film, I can't really say. I can't say I've like talked to all of the viewers or you know of this film. I think the filmmakers probably have the best pulse on that. But I will say that I think this film is giving voice to a lot of what historically disenfranchised groups are feeling, what they've experienced, and it just reinforces that we're not making this up. This is real, and people need to pay attention to that.
Right. So somebody was wondering too, is it legal to pick up ballots for others to take to drop boxes? For example, during COVID, there's a group of people who were interested in offering this volunteer help. Is that legal?
In California, it is legal, and they have to give you permission and sign the back of their envelope, and you also have to provide your name and a signature that you are being the ballot walker, I guess. But I also want to say, make sure you only give your absentee ballot to a trusted person. I've heard some horror stories about ballot harvesting, or you know, and I just don't feel comfortable taking that chance. So make sure it's someone you trust.
That's a good caveat. Is it legal to be a poll watcher in another state?
It depends on the state, right? How frustrating.
Yeah.
Almost every answer is going to be like, it depends on the county or the state. And sometimes even the city if you're Texas. So
right.
Yes, you can. If I would definitely check, and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights has all of that information by state, and that'll be one of the links I send out to you.
Okay. then let's see. Do you know if there is any recourse that we can take if we find that our ballot has not been counted, as happened to some of the people in the film?
Yes. This is why you need to sign up for Where's My Ballot, because they will tell you whether your ballot counted or not. And if it didn't count, why, and what you have to do to remedy it. So that's why it's so important to sign up for Where's My Ballot. This is
Yes.
that information.
Valerie, is there a difference actually between vote by mail or absentee ballot?
Same thing, absolute same thing. But you know, I'm saying absentee ballot because when you say vote by mail, then people think you have to put it back in the mailbox. And that's not true. You can take it to a drop box or you can walk it to a polling place. So that's why I tend to say absentee ballot.
Oh, okay.
You're absent from, you know, voting in person.
Oh, good. Somebody else had been asking, they had heard that it was no longer true that you could drop off your ballot at the polling site, but on election day, but in fact that you still can drop it off.
Yes, you can.
Okay, thanks. So somebody was asking if you know anything about voter suppression or that topic in Fort County. Have you heard of anything like that?
In which county?
Marin County, which is just close north here of the Bay.
Nothing's really popping up in my mind right now, but you know, voter suppression's happening all the time if you think about it, in like small and annoyingly hard to stamp out ways. So just the fact that we're all kind of going, oh gosh, what's happening with voting is a type of voter suppression, right? Where our election officials aren't getting that information to us in the right way. So, or in a way that we can trust. So whether it's long lines or whether we're confused about voting, it's all voter suppression.
Yeah. So are you familiar with groups that offer rides to people to take them to vote or even to take them to drop their ballots?
So I think a lot of these organizations have been trying to pivot on how they're going to do that safely during the pandemic. So so I think it really depends on the locality and whether and what the COVID rates are looking like there. So I would check, if you want to volunteer for one of those things, check in and see how they're doing and whether they need volunteers or not.
Right, yeah. So this film and your talk can be viewed on our website, which again is diversityfilmseries.org. But also, Valerie, your sort of cheat sheet or your resource guide, that's going to be posted there as well. And you did put in that some specific information about Alameda County, I believe. Is that correct? You've added quite a bit, which we really appreciate all of your research, and you're looking specifically to the Bay Area because, as you're pointing out, it's different state to state, county to county. So that's why it's so complicated for voters to try to figure this out.
Yeah, exactly. And you can always contact me on Instagram and direct message me. You can find me on Val on Voting, so, and an underscore in between. And of course, that'll be on the info sheet too. So, you know, feel free to reach out and I can at least point you in the right direction to a trusted resource if I don't know.
You don't mind if we do ask you questions when they come up on your social media? So that's great.
I get this all the time by text, and I also do this with a nonprofit I work for. So I can get you that information you need. And if you're really, how do I say? Like, this is not just for now. Voter suppression is going to keep continuing. So if you want to stay in this fight even after the elections, then I have some resources on my sheet also for that.
So I wanted to mention again that this film can be viewed on our website as well. So if you do want to share that or have other friends watch, I think watching a film like this does really fire people up, don't you think, Valerie, to try to help them to remember, as you say, it feels safe here in California, but you have to be on your toes and you have to be sure to have all your ducks in a row, vote early, follow the rules, check your registration, and all of that. So again, if you go to diversityfilmseries.org, you can see the film, and then you can also get these tips that have been prepared. So I want to check real quick and see some of our other questions here.
So I see a question about deadlines for registration. So I really, I want to make sure we are all super clear on this. So the deadline for registration is October 19th in California. So that's statewide, and you can do that online. However, you can always go to a vote center once they open and sign up to vote that day and do same day registration, and you will be doing what's called conditional voting. So that means they take all your registration information, you vote, they check your information against the state database, then they will count your vote after that's been confirmed. So although we technically have a registration deadline in California, you can still vote conditionally if you go to a polling place.
Okay, Valerie, somebody has a very timely question about people who've been dislocated by fires. Do you have any information or guidance for people on how they might be able to secure their absentee ballot and how to vote?
All you have to do is to request a temporary address change with your election official. So you can either call in or I'll try to find the link for that also. I know we have one for LA County, but I'm not sure if you have one for Alameda. But you can get a temporary address change and then just have it sent to, you can even have it sent to a service provider. So like a Red Cross shelter if you really need to. And you can have it sent anywhere. It can even be another state. So
that's great. Do you know how a person could sign up to be a poll worker?
Yeah.
Or a poll worker in another state? Is there just a place to check that?
So you can go to Power the Polls is a great organization that's doing that. And I'm not specifically sure about being a poll worker for other states. Like I said, it depends on the voting jurisdiction.
Okay, right.
Or
Right.
not.
Valerie, do you happen to know who owns the voting machines and who controls them?
Here we go again. It depends on your county. So, but they have to have all that information publicly available. So, yeah, it's the voting machine world is interesting.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So Valerie, if somebody requested a mail-in vote ballot, let's say in August, do you have any idea about when people should be looking for it? And if it doesn't arrive, what would be the next step to check?
Oh, right. Like this is why Where's My Ballot is so key.
Yeah.
All of the ballots are dropping in California on October 5th. All of them, every county, everywhere. That's like a Secretary of State thing. Alex Padilla said, y'all are sending the ballots on October 5th. So if you signed up in August, you should be on that first drop. If you register after that, then it's going to take maybe a week for them to process your registration and to mail out your absentee ballot. If it's been more than a week since you've registered or a week since October 5th and you still haven't received it, call your election official and tell them to send you another one. You have until October 27th to either request a new absentee ballot or to request an absentee ballot again. So those are, but you know, if you think about it, you're like October 27th, if the mail is being slow, then it takes a week. Like, wait, I might not make it. I might not make my absentee ballot. So even though those are the official deadlines, like try to push it earlier if you can. Earlier is better. And if it's last minute and you still haven't received it, you can always go to your local polling place or your vote center and vote in person.
Right. You know, someone had a very interesting thought, which is, you know, during COVID, rather than closing down polling stations, why not increase the number of polling stations so there are fewer people using them? But it doesn't look like that's a consideration. Is that?
So that's like one of those resource allocation puzzles, right? Because if you have more polling locations, then you also have to have more poll workers.
Oh, of course.
A poll worker shortage. So it's like a balancing act of trying to keep all that in place. So the good thing about California is that we do have early voting options. So, you know, it's not even early voting options, it's on time voting options. Okay, like let's not call them early. We have a voting period. Alameda County, you have 4 days starting that Saturday before the election. Other places have 11 days. So depending on where you're voting, you don't have to go in on November 3rd. You can go in earlier.
Yeah, and that reminds me that if for younger people to sign up to be poll workers now, with some, usually they're older people who are fearful about being poll workers now because of COVID. So if younger people would volunteer for that, that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
So some viewers are wondering about calling other states. So many people in the Bay Area have been involved in calling, texting, writing postcards. Do you have any information or thoughts about how helpful that is to getting the vote out or to informing people about how to secure their voting rights?
Historically in the past, it has been huge in voter turnout. And it also has other ramifications, not just on voter turnout, right? That's also how our political parties decide how much money to spend in a specific state or in a specific local area. And, you know, it has other downstream effects. But right now in this current environment, nobody knows what turnout's going to look like, what's going to happen in October, November is so up in the air right now, and it's going to depend so specifically on what the local conditions are. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, calling into these swing states and texting these swing states and sending them postcards and letters is going to matter. It did in the past, and I hope it matters now too, even in these pandemic conditions. And it you know, if you think about it, if we're all stuck at home, then that phone call makes so much of a difference. Getting a text from someone saying voting matters, it makes a difference. I know I volunteer for an organization that does that. And our, what is it called? Our response rate for text and phone calls has been almost double of what you would expect to see during typical times. So what we can't do canvassing and knocking on doors, what we're doing through text banking and phone banking is making up that difference. So I think it's going to make a huge difference in November. So I would say if you're doing that or thinking about doing that, keep going. It's going to make a difference.
That is so encouraging to hear, because I think many people have been doing this for quite a while or wanting to start now, but it's nice to hear that the results are so positive. And just getting people out early or to remind them you have to get your ballot in is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to remind people again that by going to diversityfilmseries.org, you can see or get a copy of Valerie's really excellent information page, her resource guide. So all of those will be there. And also the film can be seen again, and you can send that to people. I think the more people who do view the film and get the resource guide, probably the more encouraged people will be to vote early, to remember how meaningful it is to cast that vote. And I think with that, Valerie, we can't thank you enough. You've just been wonderful. We're honored to have you. You're so helpful in this, and we appreciate everybody coming to see this film and spend this time talking with us. We want to encourage you again to check out the next film, Waging Change, about tip workers, and then sign up for our flyers so you can hear about our coming documentaries. Thanks, Valerie. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Goodbye.